8-year-old Emma sat rigidly on the cold wooden bench in the courthouse hallway, her small legs barely reaching the floor. Her golden retriever, Max, pressed his warm body against her side, his head resting gently on her lap in perfect calm. The weight of his presence was the only thing anchoring her to reality as her mind threatened to drift into panic. Her small, trembling fingers found the soft fur behind his ears and stroked it methodically, over and over, finding solace in the repetitive motion. It was 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and in 13 minutes, her entire life would be decided by people who didn't know her, didn't understand her, and certainly didn't love her the way Max did. The courthouse hallway was nothing like anywhere Emma had ever been. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with an irritating hum that made her temples ache. Everything was institutional beige and gray. The walls, the tile floors, the benches, even the air seemed colorless and cold. Nothing like home. Nothing like the warmth of her mother's kitchen or the cozy corner of her bedroom where she read books with Max curled up beside her. The sterile environment felt hostile, unwelcoming, as if the building itself was conspiring against her. At 8 years old, Emma had never felt so profoundly out of place. Around her, the adults moved with urgency and purpose, as if this day was routine for them. Emma's mother's lawyer, Mr., stood by the water fountain speaking in hushed tones with a woman holding a thick manila folder. He kept glancing over at Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it pity? Concern? His gray suit seemed to absorb all the light around him. On the other side of the hallway, her father's lawyer, a tall woman named Ms., was reviewing documents with sharp, efficient movements. Emma's father paced back and forth near the courthouse entrance, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle flexing from across the hallway. He wore an expensive suit, too, and his shoes clicked against the tile floor with each step, click, 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 a sound that made Emma's stomach tighten with dread. Various social workers and court-appointed officials passed by with clipboards, making notes about Emma as if she were an item on an inventory list rather than a frightened child. They rarely made eye contact with her. When they did, their smiles looked plastic and forced. Emma didn't understand most of what they were saying, only fragments that floated through the hallway like dangerous debris. Custody arrangement. Child's best interests. Testimony this morning. Psychological evaluation pending. The words meant nothing to her individually, but collectively they spelled out one terrifying truth. Her life was being decided by people in suits, in this cold hallway, in this building she'd never been to before today. Emma's mother sat beside a window 3 benches away, her face pale and drawn. She kept wringing her hands, twist, release, a nervous habit Emma recognized because she'd seen it every day for the past 6 months, since her parents had separated. Her mother wore a simple blue dress that Emma had helped her pick out the night before. They'd stood in front of the closet together and her mother had asked, "Do you think I look okay? Do you think I look like someone the judge will believe?" Even at 8 years old, Emma had understood the weight of that question. She looked okay, but more importantly, she looked heartbroken, which was the truth. Max shifted his weight slightly, his ears perking up as he sensed the shift in Emma's emotional state. He was a registered service dog, one of the best things that had ever happened to Emma. She'd been diagnosed with severe anxiety 2 years ago after her parents started fighting all the time. The anxiety manifested in physical symptoms, her heart racing at unpredictable moments, her breathing becoming shallow, her thoughts spiraling into worst-case scenarios. Her pediatrician had recommended therapy and, eventually, a service dog. Max had arrived in her life 18 months ago, and it was like someone had finally given her a life jacket while she was drowning. He could sense her anxiety before she could even feel it rising. He would position himself between her and whatever was causing her stress. He would press his body against her when her heart was racing too fast. He was, in every meaningful way, her lifeline. The bailiff appeared at the end of the hallway, looking official in his uniform with its various badges and insignias. He checked his watch and made eye contact with Mr. It was almost time. Emma's mother stood up abruptly, smoothing down her dress with shaking hands. She walked over to Emma and knelt down, her eyes at the same level as her daughter's. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling, "remember what Dr. Reeves told us, okay? Just tell the truth. That's all you have to do. Just tell the truth." Emma nodded, but she wasn't sure what truth she was supposed to tell. There were so many different versions of the truth. There was the truth about her father that he wouldn't want her to say. There was the truth about her mother, which was mostly that she loved her and wanted to stay with her. There was the truth about how scared Emma felt in her father's house, the way his voice would get loud and angry, the way he'd tell her things that didn't match what her mother had said, the way he'd make her feel like she was choosing sides in a war she never signed up for. Which truth was supposed to come out today? Her mother pulled her into an embrace, and Emma could feel her mother's heart racing against her own chest, two frightened hearts beating together. Max pressed his entire body against both of them, as if trying to create a protective shield with his own physical presence. Emma's father stopped packing and watched them with an expression that looked like anger mixed with something else Emma couldn't identify. Maybe fear, maybe desperation. The called out, "Emma, the judge is ready." Emma's stomach dropped, her legs felt weak, but Max stood up beside her, calm and steady, as if saying without words, "I'm here. You're not alone. We can do this together." Emma took a deep breath and reached down to stroke Max's ears one more time. She stood on legs that felt like jelly and began walking toward the courtroom door. As she approached it, she could hear the murmur of voices from inside, people waiting, watching, ready to judge her story. The weight of everything pressed down on her 8-year-old shoulders like an impossible burden. But she kept walking forward, one small step at a time, with Max's presence beside her like a guardian angel in the form of a golden-furred companion. The courtroom door loomed in front of Emma like the entrance to another world, a darker, more dangerous world. It was wooden and heavy, painted an institutional brown that matched nothing but somehow managed to seem threatening. The bailiff, a middle-aged man with kind eyes that contradicted his stern demeanor, held it open for her. "Come along, sweetheart," he said gently, his hand hovering near her back without actually touching her. Emma appreciated that. She'd learned that strangers touching you when you're terrified only made things worse. Max walked beside her, his leash held loosely in her hand, his demeanor impeccably calm and professional. He'd been trained extensively for situations like this. His vest, bearing the emblem "Service Animal Do Not Disturb," was perfectly aligned on his body. Emma wondered if Max knew that his vest was supposed to make people understand something important about him. She wondered if he cared. Probably not. Max just existed in the moment, present and protective, which was exactly what Emma needed him to be. The door opened fully, and the courtroom revealed itself in all its overwhelming grandeur. The ceiling seemed impossibly high. The wood paneling on the walls made everything feel enclosed and claustrophobic despite the height. There was a long bench at the far end where the judge would sit. She wasn't there yet, and it looked like a throne meant for someone far more important than Emma would ever be. To the left was a jury box, empty because this was a custody case and wouldn't involve a jury. But its very existence, with its 12 empty chairs, felt ominous. The courtroom was already filling with people. Emma's mother sat at one table with Mr. her lawyer. Her mother's eyes met Emma's the moment she entered, and there was such a desperate, pleading quality to her expression that Emma had to look away. It hurt too much to see her mother's pain so openly displayed. On the other table sat her father with Ms., his lawyer. Her father was staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable, his hands folded precisely on the table in front of him. This was the version of her father Emma had learned to fear, the controlled, calculated version who showed nothing of his emotions until he was alone, and then he was different, loud, angry, unpredictable. Behind them in the gallery section, various spectators sat with notebooks. Some were court reporters, some were social workers, some were observers from child advocacy organizations. Emma realized with a sinking feeling that there were probably at least 30 people here to watch her testimony. 30 people who would judge her, question her, analyze her. 30 people who would wonder if she was telling the truth or lying. The thought made her palms sweat. The courtroom stenographer, an older woman with gray hair pulled into a severe bun, sat at her station with her fingers poised over the stenotype machine. She had the expression of someone who had seen thousands of cases like this, thousands of frightened children, and had stopped being affected by any of it. Emma wondered what that was like, to become so numb to other people's pain that it became just another day at work. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge entered from a side door. She was a woman in her 60s, with sharp features and intelligent eyes. She wore black robes that made her look official and untouchable. When she sat down in her high chair, she seemed to become even more elevated, more powerful, more distant from the 8-year-old girl standing in the back of the courtroom with a service dog. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Emma. "Welcome, Emma. I understand you're going to be testifying today about your living situation with both your parents. Can you tell me your full name for the record?" "Emma," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the air-conditioning hum. "Please speak up, dear. Everyone in the courtroom needs to hear you." Emma repeated her name, louder this time, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Max remained perfectly still beside her, a steady presence that kept her from completely disintegrating. The bailiff guided Emma forward to the witness stand. It was elevated, which somehow made it worse. She felt like she was being displayed on a stage, a specimen under a microscope. Max followed her, and the judge made a note about his presence without commenting. The bailiff held up a Bible, or what Emma assumed was meant to be taken seriously as some kind of important book. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth?" he asked. Emma nodded. "You need to say it out loud, honey," the bailiff prompted gently. I do," Emma said. Her mother's lawyer approached first. He was a kind man, probably in his 50s, with thinning hair and a gentle manner. He'd met with Emma 3 times before today to prepare her for testimony. He asked her basic questions designed to help establish her credibility and her comfort level. "How old are you, Emma? What grade are you in? Tell me about Max." These questions Emma could answer. They were safe. They didn't require her to choose between her parents or reveal anything dangerous. But then it was Ms. turn. Emma's father's lawyer was sharp and precise in her movements. She wore a red suit that seemed aggressive, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. She approached the stand with a notepad in her hand, and suddenly the tone of the questioning changed entirely. "Emma, your father loves you very much, doesn't he?" Ms. asked, her tone suggesting that Emma would be a terrible daughter if she disagreed. "Yes," Emma said quietly. "And you love your father?" "Yes." "You enjoy spending time with him?" Emma hesitated. This was where the lying would be expected to begin. Her father had told her during the drive to the courthouse last Saturday, "The lawyer is going to ask you questions. You need to answer them in a way that makes sense, Emma. You need to say the right things." The right things being whatever would help him win custody. "Sometimes," Emma answered carefully, which was at least partially true. Sometimes she enjoyed time with her father, but mostly she was scared. "Just sometimes?" Ms. pressed, her eyebrow raised skeptically. "Most children love spending time with their parents all the time, not just sometimes." Emma felt her heart begin to race. The familiar signs of her anxiety disorder were mounting. Her breathing became shallow. Her hands trembled. Max, sensing the change immediately, shifted his body to press more firmly against her leg, a grounding technique he'd been trained to perform. "I like spending time with him," Emma amended, hearing the uncertainty in her own voice. "That's better," Ms. said, and her smile was sharp, predatory. "Now, Emma, your father has never hurt you, has he?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Emma opened her mouth, closed it. She could feel her father watching her. She could feel her mother's desperate hope. She could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes. And she could feel the mounting panic in her own chest as she realized she had no idea what she was supposed to say. The words hung in the air like poison gas, invisible but suffocating. Your father has never hurt you, has he, Emma? It was the question Emma had been dreading since the moment she woke up that morning. It was the question her father had prepared her for, rehearsed with her, coached her on. It was the question that had no right answer, only a right answer and a wrong answer depending on who you asked. Emma's mouth went dry, her throat constricted. She tried to swallow but couldn't. The fluorescent lights above the witness stand seemed to pulse with an accusatory brightness, making everything feel surreal and dreamlike. The entire courtroom seemed to lean forward simultaneously, as if every single person present understood the gravity of this moment. This was it. This was the linchpin upon which the entire case would turn. Emma could feel it. At 8 years old, she didn't have the vocabulary to articulate what she understood, but she knew that her answer to this one question would determine so much. Perhaps everything. She could feel her father's eyes burning into her from across the courtroom. She'd felt those eyes before many times. She knew the look he was giving her, the look that said, "Answer correctly, Emma. Say no. Say Daddy has never hurt you, because if you don't, you're going to be making a very big mistake." His expression was carefully neutral, almost blank, but Emma could read the intensity underneath it. She'd had years of practice reading his moods, his silent demands, his unspoken threats. At the same time, she could see her mother in her peripheral vision. Her mother's face was stretched tight with anguish, her mouth opened slightly as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Her mother's hands were clasped so tightly together in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Emma knew what her mother wanted her to say too. Her mother wanted her to tell the truth, whatever that was. But here was the impossible problem. Emma genuinely didn't know what the truth was anymore. Her father had spent months telling her that her mother was lying, that Emma was confused, that what she thought she remembered wasn't actually what happened. And sometimes, after hearing it enough times, Emma began to wonder if he was right. The human mind is a strange thing, and an 8-year-old mind even stranger still, filled with plasticity and suggestibility. When you hear something often enough, it starts to feel true. When someone you love tells you repeatedly that your memory is wrong, you begin to doubt yourself. Had her father hurt her? It depended on what you meant by hurt. There were no bruises. There was no physical violence in the traditional sense, but there were other kinds of hurt, the kind that didn't leave visible marks. There were the raised voices during the late-night fights when Emma was supposed to be sleeping, but could hear everything through her bedroom walls. There was the time he'd grabbed her arm so hard while rushing her to get in the car that his fingers had left red marks for 3 days, marks her mother had photographed but which her father later explained had been from Emma playing too rough with Max. There was the constant undermining of her mother, the way he'd tell Emma, "Your mother is being crazy," or "Your mother doesn't understand you the way I do," or "You need to side with me on this, Emma, because your mother is trying to take you away from me." There was the psychological manipulation, the threats both explicit and implied. "If you go live with your mother, you won't be able to take Max. Your mother will poison you against me. You'll regret this when you're older and realize you chose wrong." These weren't the kind of hurt that appeared in medical textbooks. These were the wounds that bled invisibly, that left scars you couldn't see but definitely felt. Ms. was watching Emma with an expression of calculated patience. She was a professional who'd done this hundreds of times. She knew how to wait for a child's answer, how to let the silence stretch out and become uncomfortable, how to use the quiet as a pressure tactic. "It's a simple question, Emma," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Your father has never hurt you, right? Just say yes or no." Emma opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her tongue felt thick and useless. She wanted to speak, but the words seemed to be trapped somewhere deep inside her, blocked by fear and confusion and contradiction. Her heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst out of her chest. She could hear her pulse thundering in her ears, a rhythmic pounding that made it hard to think, hard to focus on anything but the overwhelming sense of panic that was beginning to consume her. Her hands trembled violently in her lap. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple. She could feel her breathing becoming shallow, her chest tightening. The symptoms of her anxiety disorder were hitting all at once, not gradually, but like a tsunami crashing over her all at once. The judge was watching her with an unreadable expression. The stenographer's fingers remained poised over her machine, waiting to transcribe whatever Emma said. The 20-plus people in the gallery were completely silent, holding their breath, understanding on some level that they were witnessing something crucial. Emma's father shifted slightly in his seat. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but Emma caught it. She understood the message. He was losing patience. He was expecting her to answer. He was wondering why she wasn't saying what he'd told her to say. Emma started, but the words wouldn't come. Max, positioned at her side with the precision of his professional training, felt the sudden spike in her anxiety. He felt her heart racing, her shallow breathing, the tremor in her muscles. This was exactly what he'd been trained for. This was the moment that mattered. In one fluid movement, he stood up and pressed his entire body against Emma's right side, not in a cuddling way but in a firmly supportive way. He was a 100-pound wall of warmth and unconditional support, anchoring her to reality, reminding her that she wasn't alone, that she had an ally in this terrifying moment. Emma's throat constricted further. She could feel tears forming behind her eyes, threatening to overflow. The pressure was immense. The weight of the decision before her felt disproportionate to her small shoulders. How could this be happening? How could she be expected to make such a significant choice at only 8 years old? "Is something wrong, Emma?" the judge asked, her tone shifting slightly to something that might have been concern. "Do you need a moment?" But Emma wasn't sure a moment would help. She wasn't sure that 1,000 moments would help. She was frozen in the intersection of impossible choices, drowning in a courtroom full of people, unable to move forward in any direction. Ms. approached again, her confidence unshaken. "Your father has never hurt you. Isn't that right, Emma?" Emma opened her mouth one more time, her small voice barely above a whisper, and that was when she did what she'd been taught to do in moments of complete psychological overwhelm. That was when she reached down, trembling, and touched Max's ear twice. Time seemed to slow down. The entire courtroom, with all its fluorescent lights and wooden paneling and collective held breath, seemed to pause on the edge of a moment. Emma's hand trembled as she reached down toward Max's ear. This was the moment she would make a choice that had been made for her in advance, a choice that only she and one other person in this world truly understood. Her trembling fingers found the soft, warm fur behind Max's ear. The fur was golden and impossibly soft, worn smooth from countless touches from her small hands over the past 18 months. She could feel his pulse beating there, a tiny rhythm of life beneath the fur. She took a breath that felt simultaneously like her first and her last. And then she did it. 2 taps, gentle but deliberate, tap, tap. It was almost invisible. To anyone watching, it looked exactly like what it appeared to be. A frightened 8-year-old girl seeking comfort from her service dog, absent-mindedly petting him in a moment of stress. A perfectly natural gesture from a child in distress. Nothing more, nothing less. Just a child and her dog, a moment of connection during a terrifying experience. But to anyone who understood the code, it meant everything. Emma's mother's eyes suddenly widened as if someone had flipped a light switch in her mind. Her hand flew to her mouth. A small gasp escaped her lips, barely audible but noticeable to those sitting nearby. She turned to look at Emma, and there was sudden recognition in her expression. Recognition and fear and hope all mixed together in a complex emotional soup. In the gallery, Dr. Reeves, Emma's child psychologist, sat bolt upright in her chair. She'd been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, observing, taking notes, waiting for the right moment to offer her professional opinion if needed. But when she saw those 2 taps on Max's ear, she understood immediately what had just happened. She understood the significance. She understood that Emma had just made a choice to tell the truth, even though it terrified her, a choice to reach out for help, a choice to activate the signal system they had developed together over many months of careful therapeutic work. Dr. Reeves had created this signal with Emma almost a year ago, during a particularly difficult therapy session. Emma had been struggling to verbalize her feelings, struggling to express herself when she felt anxious or unsafe. Traditional talk therapy wasn't working because Emma's anxiety would often rob her of words at exactly the moment she most needed them. So Dr. Reeves had asked Emma to think of something she trusted completely, something that made her feel safe. Emma had thought of Max immediately, without hesitation. Together, they developed a nonverbal communication system. 2 taps on Max's ear meant, "I'm not safe, I need help, I need protection to tell the truth." 1 tap meant something different, just a general anxiety cue. 3 taps would mean something else entirely. But 2 taps was the signal, the emergency code, the way for Emma to communicate something she might not be able to say out loud. They'd practiced it hundreds of times, in therapy sessions, at home, in situations that made Emma anxious. Emma would reach down, find the familiar softness of Max's ear and tap twice, and Dr. Reeves would respond, "I see that signal, Emma. You're safe now. What do you need to tell me?" It had become their language, their bridge across the chasm of anxiety that sometimes separated Emma from her own voice. But Emma had never used it in a moment like this. She'd never used it in front of 30 people in a courtroom. She'd never used it when her entire future hung in the balance. She'd never used it when there was so much at stake. Yet she had used it now. And in using it, she had just told the adults in this courtroom something profound, though most of them had no idea what they'd just witnessed. Ms. the lawyer paused. She'd been so focused on Emma's facial expressions and vocal responses that she'd almost missed the gesture. But she hadn't quite missed it. There was something in the way Emma had touched the dog, something deliberate about it that caused a tiny alarm bell to go off in her professional instincts. She'd cross-examined children before. She'd faced service animals in courtrooms before. But there was something different about this moment. Emma's father's expression changed. It tightened. His jaw clenched even more than it had been before. He glanced quickly at Ms., then back at Emma, and there was something in his eyes that looked like calculation mixed with anger, mixed with the first real hint of worry that perhaps things weren't going exactly according to his plan. The judge noticed something too, though she wasn't entirely sure what. She'd been watching Emma's body language, watching for signs of truthfulness or deception, watching for the indicators that years of judicial experience had taught her to recognize. She noticed the gesture. She noticed Emma's mother's sudden intake of breath. She noticed the intensity with which the gallery suddenly seemed to focus. Something had just happened, something subtle but significant. Emma's hand remained on Max's ear for a moment longer than necessary. She could feel Max's warmth beneath her palm. She could feel his steady presence, his unwavering loyalty. In that moment, she felt something shift inside her. Something rigid began to soften. Something terrifying began to feel fractionally less impossible. The signal had been sent. The code had been transmitted. And now, whether anyone in this courtroom understood it or not, things had fundamentally changed. Dr. Reeves slowly stood up from her seat in the gallery. She moved methodically, deliberately, her clinical training overriding any emotional response she might have had. She understood that this moment required professional composure. She understood that Emma had just reached out for help in the only way she knew how. She understood that it was time for an adult to respond. Emma's mother was trembling now, her entire body shaking with something that might have been fear, or might have been relief, or might have been both simultaneously. She turned to Mr., her lawyer, and whispered something urgently in his ear. Mr.'s eyes narrowed with interest. He too understood that something significant had just occurred. Emma felt a wave of something wash over her, not quite relief, because the situation was far from resolved, but something like permission. Permission to let the adults handle this. Permission to have made a choice to ask for help. Permission to let her small, 8-year-old voice be amplified by this gesture. 2 taps. That was all it took. 2 taps on the ear of her most loyal companion, and the entire direction of the courtroom began to shift, like tectonic plates grinding against each other beneath the surface of a seemingly calm landscape. The courtroom waited. Everyone was watching Emma now, though they didn't yet understand what they were watching for. Something had happened. Something important. Something that would soon change everything. Emma's mother stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped backward against the courtroom floor with a loud, jarring screech that echoed through the otherwise silent room. Every head turned toward her. The sound itself seemed to announce that something was happening, that the careful protocols of the courtroom were about to be disrupted. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide, her entire body vibrating with barely contained emotion. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking but determined, "I need to inform the court of something significant, something crucial." Judge looked up from her notes with an expression of mild annoyance at the interruption. "Ms., you need to remain seated unless you're recognized by the court. There's a procedure here." "I understand, Your Honor," Emma's mother interrupted, her voice gaining strength despite its tremor. "But what just happened in this courtroom requires immediate attention. My daughter just communicated something important, and if we don't address it now, we may miss critical information." The judge's expression shifted from irritation to interest. She leaned forward slightly, her judicial demeanor transforming into something more alert. "Explain," she said simply. Dr. Reeves was already moving. She'd stood up from her seat in the gallery the moment the signal had been sent, and she was now walking purposefully toward the front of the courtroom, her leather briefcase in hand. She moved with the confidence of someone who understood the gravity of the situation and was prepared to intervene professionally. Emma's father shifted in his chair. His lawyer, Ms., placed a restraining hand on his arm, a silent warning to remain composed and not do anything that might draw more negative attention. But Emma could see the tension in his neck, the way his jaw was clenched so hard she was worried his teeth might break. "Your Honor," Emma's mother continued, "my daughter has been in therapy with Dr. Reeves for nearly a year. Dr. Reeves, could you please approach the bench?" The judge held up a hand. "Let's maintain proper courtroom procedure. Dr. Reeves, are you present in this courtroom?" "I am, Your Honor," Dr. Reeves said, her voice calm and professional. She'd reached the bench now, her posture upright, her demeanor that of a seasoned professional accustomed to courtroom testimony. "And what is your qualification to be here today?" the judge asked. "I'm a licensed clinical child psychologist with 15 years of experience in family trauma and childhood anxiety disorders. I've been providing therapeutic services to Emma for approximately 11 months. The judge nodded slowly. "And what is it that you believe you witnessed moments ago that warrants this interruption?" Dr. Reeves took a breath. This was the moment. This was where professional restraint had to give way to advocacy for the child. "Your Honor, approximately 30 seconds ago, Emma made a deliberate gesture toward her service animal. Specifically, she tapped twice on the dog's ear." There was a moment of silence. The judge's expression suggested confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" "2 taps on the service dog's ear," Dr. Reeves repeated. "It's a nonverbal communication system that we developed together in therapy. Emma suffers from severe anxiety disorder, particularly in situations involving authority figures. When she experiences overwhelming anxiety or feels unsafe, she's often unable to verbalize her emotions. We created this signal system as a therapeutic intervention." "What does the signal mean?" the judge asked sharply. 2 taps on the dog's ear means, "I'm not safe. I need help to tell the truth." The words hung in the courtroom like a bomb that had just detonated. For a moment, there was complete and utter silence. Then, as if someone had opened a floodgate, the entire courtroom erupted. Whispers exploded across the gallery. People leaned forward, discussing urgently with their neighbors. Some reached for their phones to take notes. The stenographer's fingers flew across her machine, transcribing every word. In the back of the courtroom, one of the social workers stood up, her expression suddenly intense with professional concern. Emma's mother put her hand over her mouth, but you could see the tears streaming down her face. Tears of something: hope, vindication, relief, anger at what her daughter had endured, all mixed together. Emma's father's face had gone very still, very pale. His lawyer, Ms., was whispering urgently to him, but he didn't seem to be listening. He was staring directly at Emma, and for the first time there was no mask over his emotions. There was only shock and rage, and the dawning realization that his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. "Order," the judge called out, banging her gavel 3 times. "Order in my courtroom." The whispers didn't stop immediately, but they diminished slightly. The judge stood up from her chair, which was a dramatic move that commanded immediate attention. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Dr. Reeves," the judge said, her voice sharp with intelligence. "Emma made this signal during cross-examination by opposing counsel. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, specifically when Ms. asked Emma if her father had ever hurt her." "And in your professional opinion, what does this signal indicate?" Dr. Reeves chose her words carefully. "In my professional opinion, this signal indicates that Emma felt unsafe at that moment. It indicates that she experienced anxiety and distress during that questioning. Most significantly, it indicates that she felt unable to tell the truth in response to that question, that she felt pressured or threatened by the question itself." "Threatened by the question," the judge repeated. "As in, she couldn't answer truthfully because she feared the consequences." "Precisely, Your Honor." The courtroom exploded again. This time, the judge didn't bother with the gavel. She simply sat down and watched as the reality of what had been revealed began to sink in across the courtroom. Emma's mother was now openly weeping. Her lawyer, was shaking his head slowly, his expression a mixture of sadness and professional satisfaction. He'd suspected coaching. He'd suspected manipulation. But now there was physical, observable evidence. The judge turned to look at Emma directly. "Emma, is Dr. Reeves correct? Did you use that signal just now because you felt unsafe?" Emma looked down at Max, who remained perfectly still, perfectly present, and then slowly she nodded, once, firmly. "I need a verbal answer, Emma," the judge said, not unkindly. "Yes," Emma whispered. "I was scared to answer the question." "Why were you scared to answer the question, Emma?" Emma hesitated, looking toward her father involuntarily. It was a look that spoke volumes. "We'll get to that," the judge said, clearly understanding the significance of the glance. She turned to Ms. "I'm going to need to suspend cross-examination at this moment while we address what appears to be a much more significant issue, potential witness intimidation or coaching of a minor." "Your Honor, I must protest," Ms. began, standing up. "Your protest is noted and overruled," the judge said flatly. "What we have here is evidence of a child in distress, communicating that she felt unsafe answering questions posed by counsel for the respondent. That raises serious concerns about the validity of this testimony and about potential improper influence on the child." She turned to the bailiff. "I want a recess, 30 minutes. During that time, I want Emma to remain with Dr. Reeves and her mother. I want a full written explanation from Dr. Reeves about this signal system and Emma's mental state, and I want to know everything." She looked directly at Emma's father. "Everything." The courtroom fell silent. Everyone seemed to understand that the case had just fundamentally shifted. What had been a straightforward custody dispute had transformed into something more serious, a potential investigation into child manipulation and witness intimidation. Emma sat in the witness stand, her hand still resting on Max's ear, and for the first time that day, she felt something like hope. The 30-minute recess had felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Emma sat in a small consultation room adjacent to the courtroom with her mother on one side and Dr. Reeves on the other. Max lay across both their laps, his weight a reassuring presence that somehow made it easier to breathe. The room was smaller and warmer than the courtroom, with softer lighting that didn't feel as institutional. It was still not comfortable, but it was better. "Emma," Dr. Reeves said gently, "you did something very brave out there. You asked for help when you needed it. That took tremendous courage." "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Now," Dr. Reeves said, "the judge wants to hear from you. She wants to understand what made you feel unsafe during Ms. questioning. But this time you have me here with you, and your mom is here, and Max, and we're going to help you tell your story." Emma's mother reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You can tell the truth, sweetheart. That's all anyone is asking you to do. Just tell the truth about what happened." When they returned to the courtroom, something had changed. The judge had reviewed Dr. Reeves' written report. The gallery had been partially cleared of casual observers, though the social workers and child advocates remained. Emma's father sat at his table with Ms., but he looked diminished somehow, as if the weight of what was coming had already begun to crush him. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by something that looked like desperation. The bailiff helped Emma back into the witness stand. Max was positioned beside her, and this time the judge made no objection to his presence. In fact, she seemed to understand his importance. "Emma," the judge said, her voice gentler than it had been before but still carrying the weight of authority, "I want you to know that you're not in trouble. You're not going to get in trouble for telling the truth. Do you understand?" Emma nodded. "Say yes or no for the record, please." "Yes," Emma said. "Now, when Ms. asked you if your father had ever hurt you, you felt unsafe. Can you tell me why?" Emma took a deep breath. Max pressed against her leg. She could feel her mother's eyes on her, filled with love and support. She could feel Dr. Reeves' steady, professional presence, a trained adult who understood what she was about to do and would help her through it. "Daddy told me what to say," Emma began, her small voice trembling but determined. "Before we came to court, he told me that I needed to say nice things about him. He said the lawyer was going to ask me questions, and I needed to answer them the right way." "What did he mean by the right way?" the judge asked. "He said I needed to say that he never hurt me. He said if I didn't say that, then I wouldn't get to live with him, and I wouldn't get to have Max with me anymore." The courtroom was completely silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of traffic from outside, the soft breathing of 30 people holding their breath. "Did your father ever tell you what would happen if you told the truth?" Dr. Reeves asked gently. Emma turned to look at her therapist. "He said that if I said bad things about him, then he would be very sad and angry. He said that Mommy was trying to take me away from him, and that I had to help him not lose me." "So you felt like you had to protect your father by lying?" the judge asked. "Yes," Emma said, "because if I didn't he'd be mad and then he'd make me feel bad." "Can you describe what you mean by make you feel bad?" Dr. Reeves prompted. Emma's hands trembled. She reached down to touch Max's ear, not the signal this time, just seeking comfort. "He yells a lot, really loud, and he says mean things about Mommy. He tells me that Mommy is crazy and that she doesn't really love me. He says she's trying to poison me against him." "Has your father ever done anything physical to hurt you?" the judge asked. "One time," Emma said slowly, "I didn't want to go to his house. I was crying because I wanted to stay with Mommy, and he grabbed my arm." She held up her arm and pulled up her sleeve, though the marks were long gone now. "He grabbed it really hard. It left marks. Mommy took pictures. He said he was just trying to get me to listen, that he wasn't trying to hurt me, that I was being dramatic." Emma's mother made a small sound, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, and reached for Emma's hand. "Did he apologize for hurting your arm?" the judge asked. "No," Emma said. "He said I made him do it because I was being difficult." "Emma," Dr. Reeves said, her professional voice gentle but clear, "I want you to know that what you're describing, telling a child they have to lie to protect a parent, threatening to take away things the child loves, yelling, name-calling about the other parent, physical grabbing. These are all forms of abuse. Do you understand what I'm saying? Emma nodded slowly. I think so. It makes me feel scared. I know it does, Dr. Reeves said. You've been very brave to tell us about it. Ms. stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine. Sit down, the judge said flatly. There will be no cross-examination at this time. What we have here is a child describing consistent patterns of behavioral manipulation and coercion. This is not appropriate material for adversarial questioning. Ms. sat down, her expression stormy. The judge turned back to Emma. Is there anything else you think the court should know about how your father treats you? Emma looked at Max, then at her mother, then at Dr. Reeves. And then, with the kind of courage that only a desperate child can summon, she began to speak. She described the late-night fights she could hear through her bedroom walls. She described how her father would make disparaging comments about her mother's appearance and intelligence. She described the emotional withdrawal when she showed affection toward her mother. She described being told repeatedly that she was disappointing her father, that she wasn't living up to his expectations, that she was making choices that would hurt him. With each revelation, the courtroom became more tense. The social workers were taking notes furiously. The judge's expression grew darker. Emma's mother wept quietly, her hand never leaving her daughter's. By the time Emma finished speaking, nearly 40 minutes had passed. She was emotionally exhausted, drained in a way that only children who have been forced to process adult trauma can be. But she was also, for the first time in months, lighter. The weight of the secrets, the burden of the lies, the responsibility of protecting her father, all of it had been lifted. Emma, the judge said, I want to thank you for your honesty today. What you've done took tremendous courage. You should be very proud of yourself. Emma looked down at Max, and he looked up at her with those patient, loyal eyes. She reached down and stroked his ears gently, not a signal this time, just a gesture of gratitude to the one being in this courtroom who had never wavered in his support. Your Honor, Dr. Reeves said, I'd like to formally request that this testimony be reviewed in light of potential Child Protective Services involvement. The patterns Emma has described are consistent with emotional abuse and coercive control. The judge nodded. So noted. We will be adjourning for lunch, after which I will be issuing my preliminary findings and custody determination. Court is in recess. As the judge stood and walked from the courtroom, Emma sat in the witness stand surrounded by the people who loved her, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt safe. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall courtroom windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. Everyone had returned from lunch, Emma and her mother and Dr. Reeves, the lawyers on both sides, the social workers, the observers, the court reporters. The gallery was now completely full. Word had spread about what was happening in Courtroom B, and people wanted to witness this moment. This was going to be a landmark case. Everyone could feel it. Emma sat beside her mother, with Max positioned between them. The dog seemed to sense the significance of the moment. He was unnaturally still, his brown eyes alert and watchful, as if he understood that everything was about to change. Judge entered from her chambers and resumed her seat on the bench. She was carrying a thick folder of notes, pages and pages of careful documentation, observations, and judicial reasoning. She set it down deliberately, the gesture carrying weight and authority. This court has reviewed the testimony given this morning, the judge began, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom with absolute clarity. This court has reviewed the psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Reeves. This court has considered the evidence presented by both parties. And this court has observed a child in profound distress when asked to participate in what appears to be a coordinated effort to manipulate her testimony. She paused, letting her words settle into the courtroom like stones dropping into still water. Based on the testimony of Emma, her psychological presentation, the clear evidence of coaching and intimidation, and the established patterns of emotional and psychological abuse, this court finds in favor of the mother for full and primary custody of the minor child, Emma. The courtroom erupted. Emma's mother made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and pulled her daughter into an embrace. Tears streamed down her face, tears of vindication, of relief, of the weight of months of uncertainty finally lifting. Around the gallery, social workers and child advocates nodded, some making notes, some simply sitting back with expressions of quiet satisfaction that justice had been served. Emma's father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping backward with a loud clang. "This is bullshit," he shouted. "This is completely biased." "Sit down," the judge said, her voice like ice. "You will remain silent in my courtroom or you will be removed." Ms. placed a hand on his arm, trying to pull him back into his seat, but he wrenched away from her, his face red with rage. "I want to say something," he said loudly. "That child is lying. She's been poisoned against me." "Your Honor," Emma's mother stood up, "I'd like to request a protective order." "Granted," the judge said immediately. "Mister, you are hereby ordered to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from Ms. and Emma at all times. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and criminal charges." "This is insane," Emma's father continued, his voice rising to a shout. "You're destroying me. You're all destroying me." The bailiff moved forward. "Sir, you need to sit down." "I'm not sitting down," he shouted. "I'm not going to listen to." The bailiff reached him, and Emma's father threw his arm up, nearly striking the officer. Within seconds, 2 more security personnel were there, and Emma's father was being physically restrained. He struggled against them, his face contorted with anger and desperation. "Get your hands off me," he yelled. "This is a setup. That little bitch is lying." Emma flinched at the word, and Max immediately pressed harder against her, a trained response to her distress. Dr. Reeves placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "Remove him from the courtroom," the judge said calmly, "and charges of contempt of court will be filed." The security personnel escorted Emma's father toward the exit. He continued to struggle and shout, his words becoming increasingly incoherent as he was removed. "Emma, Emma, you know this isn't true. You know what your mother is making you do." But Emma didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Max, on her mother, on Dr. Reeves. She didn't look back. Once he was gone, the courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. The judge waited until complete silence had been restored before she continued. "However," she said, her voice carrying a different tone now. Not anger, but something that sounded like admiration. "Before I conclude this proceeding, I want to address something that occurred in this courtroom today that I believe is of significant importance not just to this case, but to future proceedings involving vulnerable children and service animals." She leaned forward, looking directly at Emma and Max. "I have been a judge for 28 years. I have presided over hundreds of custody disputes, protective order hearings, and cases involving child testimony. I have never witnessed a more powerful demonstration of the bond between a child and a service animal, nor have I ever seen such an animal play such a crucial role in protecting a vulnerable witness." Max's ears perked up slightly, as if he understood he was being addressed. The service animal in this case, a dog named Max, was positioned to provide emotional support to Emma during what was clearly an extraordinarily traumatic experience. But what occurred today was far more significant than that. The communication system developed by Dr. Reeves and this child, using the dog as an intermediary, allowed Emma to express something she could not verbalize. It allowed her to reach out for help when she felt most vulnerable. In doing so, Max became not merely an emotional support animal, but an advocate for a child who could not advocate for herself. The judge adjusted her glasses and continued with obvious deliberation. "Therefore, I am issuing a formal commendation to Max, the service dog, for his extraordinary role in this proceeding. I am further recommending that this case be cited in future judicial proceedings and in the training of Child Protective Services professionals as a model for how service animals can facilitate truth-telling and protect vulnerable witnesses. She picked up a document that had been prepared in advance and read from it. This court recognizes that Max demonstrated exceptional behavioral training, emotional intelligence, and unwavering loyalty to Emma during proceedings in which the child was subjected to witness intimidation and coercive questioning. The dog's presence and the communication system established through therapeutic intervention allowed justice to be served and a child to be protected. The court hereby issues this commendation with the understanding that similar protocols may be valuable in future cases involving anxious or traumatized children. The judge banged her gavel once, decisively. Additionally, supervised visitation only for Mr. is pending his completion of a comprehensive psychological evaluation and parenting program. Any further contact with the child outside of supervised visits will constitute a violation of court order and result in criminal charges. She turned to look at Emma directly. Emma, I want you to know that you showed extraordinary bravery today. Not everyone could do what you did, speak the truth even when it was terrifying, even when it meant standing against someone who had power over you. You should be very proud of yourself. And I want you to know that this court believes you, supports you, and is committed to keeping you safe. Thank you, Your Honor, Emma said quietly, her voice steady. The judge nodded. Court is adjourned. As she stood to leave the bench, something unexpected happened. Scattered throughout the gallery, people began to stand. First the social workers, then the child advocates, then observers who had no official role in the case but had witnessed something profound. They stood in quiet respect, not applauding. That would have been inappropriate in a courtroom, but standing in acknowledgement of what had transpired. Of justice served, of a child protected, of truth vindicated. Emma's mother wrapped her arms around her daughter. Dr. Reeves stood beside them, her expression one of professional satisfaction mixed with genuine care. And Max, steady and loyal as always, remained pressed against Emma's side, his work complete, his commitment honored. The courtroom was transforming around them. People gathering their things, documents being filed, the machinery of justice moving forward. But in the center of it all was a little girl, her mother, her therapist, and a golden retriever, surrounded by the tangible reality that sometimes, when a child speaks the truth, the world listens. 3 months had passed since that morning in the courtroom when everything changed. Emma walked out of the school's front doors into the golden afternoon light, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a genuine smile, not the practiced kind she used to wear, but a real one lighting up her face. The smile of a child who had survived something difficult and come out the other side. Her mother was waiting by the car, and Max bounded excitedly from the back seat when he saw Emma, his tail wagging so hard his entire back half seemed to move with it. Emma dropped her backpack and ran toward him, burying her face in his fur. "Hi, buddy," she whispered. "I missed you so much." "How was school?" her mother asked as Emma climbed into the car with Max. "Good," Emma said simply. "Really good. We read about animals in science class, and I told everyone about Max and how he helped me in court. Mrs. said it was an amazing story." Emma's mother reached back and squeezed her daughter's hand. The changes in Emma over the past 3 months had been nothing short of miraculous. The anxiety that had once defined so much of her daily existence had diminished significantly. She still had anxious moments that would probably always be true, but they were manageable now. She had tools. She had support. She had safety. The legal custody arrangement was firm and final. Emma lived with her mother full-time. Her father's supervised visitation had been scheduled for twice a month, but after the first supervised visit, he had declined to participate further. According to the social worker who oversaw the visits, he had become verbally abusive and had stormed out of the visit after 20 minutes, refusing to return. The second scheduled visit had been canceled at his request. Emma hadn't expressed disappointment, which Dr. Reeves noted in her therapy notes as a healthy boundary being established. Her father had completed a psychological evaluation, which revealed significant narcissistic personality traits and poor emotional regulation. The parenting program he was required to complete was still ongoing, and there was no indication that he was taking it seriously. His lawyer had filed an appeal of the custody decision, but the appeal was expected to be given the severity of the evidence presented and the judge's detailed findings. That evening, Emma sat with Dr. Reeves in her familiar office, a space that had become as safe and welcoming as her own bedroom. The soft lighting, the comfortable chair, the presence of a small fish tank with its gentle bubbling sounds, and of course, Max stretched out on the floor beside her. Dr. Reeves had even created a small cushion specifically for Max to lie on during their sessions. "I've been thinking about something," Emma said, absently stroking Max's ear, not the signal, just a comfortable, affectionate gesture. "What I did in the courtroom, with the signal." "What about it?" Dr. Reeves asked gently. "I was so scared," Emma said, "but Max was there and it was like he was saying, 'You're not alone, you can do this.' And somehow I did it." Dr. Reeves smiled. "That's what real courage is, Emma. It's not about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. And you're right that Max was there for you. That's what bonds like yours are made of, mutual trust and support." "Do you think other kids could use a signal like that? Like, if they were scared to tell the truth?" "Absolutely," Dr. Reeves said. "In fact, other child psychologists have already been contacting me about the signal system we developed together. We're thinking about publishing our experience so that other therapists and families might benefit from it." Emma felt a small surge of pride. She had done something that might help other children. That realization gave her perspective on her experience. Yes, it had been traumatic. Yes, it had been difficult. But it had also made her stronger, and it had created something that could help others. A week later, Emma received a formal letter in the mail. It was addressed to her, in care of her mother. Emma opened it with her mother present, unfolding the official document from the state university. It was an invitation. The Department of Child Psychology at the university was undertaking a research project examining service animals' roles in child advocacy and trauma recovery. They were interested in studying the case of Emma and Max as a model for future interventions. They wanted Emma and Dr. Reeves to participate in interviews and documentation of their work together. "We want to ask your permission," her mother read aloud, "and your voluntary participation in helping us better understand how we can use service animals to help other children communicate truth and access safety." Emma looked at Max, who looked back at her with those patient, intelligent eyes. "Can we do it?" she asked her mother. Her mother smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "If you want to, sweetheart, absolutely. You're not obligated to, but if you want to help other kids the way Max helped you, then yes, we can do it together." Over the next months, Emma became involved in the research project. She participated in interviews where she described her experience. She allowed recordings to be made of her interactions with Max and Dr. Reeves. She attended a university research presentation where psychologists, judges, social workers, and child advocates heard her story. She stood on a stage in front of 200 professionals and talked about being scared and about how a signal on a dog's ear had changed everything. The case became a landmark precedent. Future judges cited it in their decisions. Universities added it to their curriculum. Child Protective Services agencies around the country began exploring similar signal systems with traumatized children. Max's commendation from the judge was framed and hung in the courthouse, a permanent reminder of what was possible when a child and an animal worked together toward truth and safety. On a warm Sunday afternoon in late September, exactly 1 year after the signal in the courtroom, Emma and her mother took Max to a dog park. Emma had requested it as a way of celebrating what she called the day everything got better. They'd brought a small picnic, and they sat on a bench while Max played with other dogs, his golden fur gleaming in the sunlight. "I was thinking," Emma's mother said, watching her daughter watch Max, "about how lucky we are. Lucky to have found Dr. Reeves. Lucky that you had Max. Lucky that the judge listened." "I was thinking the same thing," Emma said. "But also, I was thinking about how I did it, like I was so scared but I did it anyway, and I didn't know I could do something that hard." "You learned something important about yourself," her mother said. "You learned that you're stronger than your fear. That's a lesson that will help you your whole life." Emma reached down and picked up a tennis ball, tossing it across the grass. Max bounded after it, his legs pumping with pure joy, his entire body expressing the simple happiness of a dog doing what he loved. He retrieved the ball and brought it back to Emma, dropping it at her feet, ready to play again. As Emma threw the ball over and over, watching Max run and retrieve with endless enthusiasm, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The fear, the confusion, the impossible choice she'd had to make. The moment when she'd tapped his ear twice and everything had changed. The courage it had taken to speak the truth. The adults who had listened. The justice that had followed. She understood now that some bonds transcend the typical relationships between people. Some bonds exist between a child and an animal, bonds forged in trust and strengthened through shared adversity. Bonds that give voice to the voiceless. Bonds that protect the vulnerable. Bonds that transform fear into courage and silence into truth. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma threw the ball one more time. Max raced across the grass, his golden fur catching the last rays of sunlight. Emma watched him, and in that moment she felt something settle deep inside her, a sense of peace, of safety, of belonging. She had survived. She had spoken. She had been believed. And Max had been there every step of the way, a four-legged reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest meaning, and that love, loyalty, and courage can change everything. The end.